The lawyer's voice cut through the quiet room, and my world ended. "To my beloved wife, Sarah," he read from my husband Mark's will, "I leave nothing." The words hung in the air, heavy and cruel. Across the table, my husband's family didn't even try to hide their smiles. His own brother Richard and his sister Clara looked at me with cold, happy eyes. I was a widow, and in one moment my family had made me a beggar in front of everyone. Friend, before I tell you what the lawyer did next, right after they all left me there alone, would you do me a kindness? Please tap subscribe so you don't miss what happens when a woman with nothing left to lose decides to fight back. I felt their stares as I stood up, my legs shaking. The shame was a hot poker in my chest. I had lost my husband, and now it seemed I had lost my entire life with him. The lawyer, a man named Mr. Thompson, watched them all leave, but just as I turned to go, his eyes met mine, and he gave a tiny, almost invisible shake of his head. He was telling me to wait. The heavy office door clicked shut, leaving just me and Mr. Thompson in the dead silence. The feeling in the room changed. It was no longer cold and sad. It was full of a secret. He walked over to the door and locked it. My heart started to beat fast. What was he doing? He came back to the big polished table and leaned close to me. His voice was just a whisper. "That will," he said, "was a lie." He pushed a small, heavy key across the table toward me. It was old and fancy. "This," he said, his eyes serious, "is what Mark really left you." I stared at the key, then back at his face. I was so confused. A lie? Why would Mark lie in his own will? But it was what Mr. Thompson said next that made all the air leave my lungs. "He did it to protect you. From them." "He knew they would fight you on every dollar, Sarah," Mr. Thompson whispered. "He knew how greedy his brother Richard could be." My mind was spinning. Protect me? It felt like he had thrown me to the wolves. Mark was a planner, a man who thought of everything. But this felt like a cruel joke. I picked up the key. It was cold and heavy in my hand. What kind of game had my husband been playing? I thought about all the years we were married, the trust we shared. Or at least, the trust I thought we shared. Why didn't he tell me? Why leave me to be shamed like that in front of the family that always looked down on me? I looked at the key again. It was just a small piece of metal. But right then, I knew it was the start of a journey into the secret life of the man I loved. The car was so quiet on the way home. The silence was a heavy blanket. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw my son, Leo. He is only 10 years old. His face was full of worry. A child shouldn't have to look so scared. I knew I had to be strong for him. But how could I be strong when our whole world had just been pulled out from under us? As I turned onto our street, my heart dropped into my stomach. There was a black car parked in our driveway. I knew that car, and the man leaning against it made my blood run cold. It was my brother-in-law, Richard. He was the last person on earth I wanted to see, and he was waiting for me. Richard had a mean smile on his face as I got out of the car. "Sarah," he said, his voice smooth like oil, "I am so sorry for your loss." His words were fake. I could hear it. He then said, "I just came by to pick up a few of Mark's things. He promised them to me." I stood there, frozen. He wasn't asking me. He was telling me. He walked right past me, toward the front door of the house Mark and I had built together. He acted like he owned the place. My fear started to turn into anger. This was my home, my son's home, and he was not welcome here. I followed him to the door, my mind racing. I had to get him out, but I had no idea how. "You can't go in there," I said, my voice shaking a little. Richard stopped and turned around, one eyebrow raised. I had to think fast. "Mark," I started, the lie forming on my lips. "Mark sold most of his valuable things before he passed, to pay for his doctors." It sounded weak, even to my own ears. Richard just stared at me. He had cold, empty eyes like a shark. "Is that so?" he asked. "Then I guess you won't mind if I take the old family clock. The one father gave him. He promised it to me." My heart sank. I had never seen a family clock. I had no idea what he was talking about. He knew I didn't know. He was testing me. He was enjoying this. Richard finally left after I told him I had no idea where the clock was. He was angry. The house felt dirty after he was in it. I locked the door and leaned against it, finally letting myself breathe. I slid down to the floor, my anger gone, replaced by a deep, tired sadness. After a few minutes, I pulled the key out of my pocket. I needed to focus. I ran my thumb over the fancy designs carved into the metal, and then I felt it. It was so small I almost missed it. On the side of the key there was a tiny engraving, a set of numbers. It looked like a serial number, the kind you see on any product. But something told me these numbers were much more than that. They had to be a clue, a safe deposit box. That had to be it. Mark had a secret box with money or papers in it. The next day, I left Leo with a neighbour and went to every bank in town. At each one, I showed them the key and the numbers. And at each one, the teller shook their head. "Sorry, this isn't one of ours," they all said. My hope started to fade with every no. I was at the last bank, about to give up. The teller was a kind woman with soft eyes. She looked at the numbers on the key. "Ma'am," she said gently, "these aren't numbers for a bank box." My heart sank. But then she said, "I think I know what these are. These look like coordinates, for a map. Coordinates, a location." I put the numbers into the map on my phone. My heart was pounding. I expected it to lead me to a fancy building downtown, or a private security company. But the little blue dot on the map took me to the other side of town. It led me to an old rusty industrial park where buildings were falling apart. It made no sense. I found the right unit number. The door was covered in rust and dirt. This couldn't be right. My husband Mark was a man who loved new, clean things. He hated messes. He would never own a place like this. What could he possibly hide in a place so run down and forgotten? I stood there for a long time, too scared to open the door. I took a deep breath and pulled on the lock. It was old and stuck, but the key slid in perfectly. With a loud groan, the lock opened. I pulled up the big metal door. It was dark inside. The air that came out smelled old, like dust and machine oil. I used the flashlight on my phone to look inside. My heart almost stopped. It was not what I expected. There was no treasure, no boxes of money, no gold bars. Instead, the small room was filled with big, strange machines, and the far wall was covered in maps of our town, covered in strange drawings and notes. I took a step inside, the metal door slamming shut behind me with a loud bang. I was trapped in the dark with my husband's secret. I found a light switch on the wall, and the small room filled with a dim yellow light. Now I could see everything clearly. There were machines for testing soil, boxes of chemicals, and binders, dozens of them, filled with papers and numbers I didn't understand. This was a workshop, a science lab. But Mark was a computer guy. He built software. He didn't know anything about rocks and dirt. My head was spinning. It was like finding out the man you married had a whole other life you knew nothing about. I ran my hand over a dusty table. This wasn't just a secret. It was a lie. A huge lie he had kept from me for years. My confusion was turning into a deep, cold feeling of being alone. I spent hours in that dusty room looking through everything. I was looking for answers for something that made sense, but I only found more questions. I got so frustrated that I slammed my hand on an old metal desk. The sound echoed in the small space, but then I heard a small click. A small part of the desk, right under the main top, had popped open. It was a secret compartment. My hands were shaking as I reached inside. My fingers touched something small and cold. It was a phone, a simple, cheap burner phone. Not the fancy smartphone Mark always used. This was the kind of phone people used when they didn't want to be found. And it felt very, very dangerous. I pushed the power button, and the little screen lit up. My breath caught in my throat. I expected to see messages or a list of calls, but there was nothing. The phone was completely empty. Except for one thing, there was only one contact saved in the phone. It had a strange name. It just said, Janus. Who was Janus? The name meant nothing to me. I stared at the screen, at that one name. It felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff. I knew that if I called that number, there was no going back. I would be stepping into the secret world my husband had built, and I had no idea what I would find there. My fingers shook as I pressed the call button. I put the phone to my ear, my heart pounding like a drum. It rang once. A man answered. His voice was rough like gravel. He didn't say hello. He said 5 strange words. Does the river run clear? I was so shocked I couldn't speak. What did that mean? It had to be a code. I didn't know what to say. I just stayed silent. After a few seconds of quiet, the man on the other end hung up. The line went dead. I stood there in the dusty workshop, my mind racing. A secret lab, a burner phone, a code phrase. My husband's secrets were deeper and darker than I had ever imagined. Shaken, I put the phone down and turned back to the binders. I had to find an answer. I started flipping through the pages one after another. They were full of charts and maps and numbers. It was all so confusing. Then I found a map of our county. It had big red circles drawn in several places. I knew those places. They were the spots where new houses were being built. And then I saw who was building those houses. It was Richard's company, my brother-in-law. Why would Mark be studying the land where Richard was building? I felt a cold knot of fear in my stomach. This was not a coincidence. This was something terrible. I looked closer at the map. Next to each of the red circles, Mark had written notes in his small, neat handwriting. The notes were about the soil. They were numbers and chemical names I didn't know. But I saw the words danger and highly toxic. I finally understood. Mark had found poison in the soil. Richard wasn't just building houses. He was building them on land that was dangerous. Land that could make people sick. My husband had discovered that his own brother was putting families, children, in danger just to make money. He was a monster, and my husband had the proof. That night, I tried to act like everything was normal for my son, Leo. We ate dinner and did his homework, but kids know when something is wrong. Leo could see the worry on my face. As I was tucking him into bed, he looked up at me with his big, sad eyes. "Are we going to have to move, Mom?" he asked. His little voice was so full of fear. I hugged him tight. "No, sweetie," I said, trying to make my voice sound strong. "Everything is going to be okay, I promise." But as I said the words, I didn't know if I was lying. I had stumbled into a very dangerous secret, and I was afraid of what Richard would do if he found out that I knew. After Leo was asleep, I sat in the dark living room, and all the pieces came together. It hit me so hard, it felt like I couldn't breathe. Mark wasn't a computer guy with a strange hobby. He was an investigator. He was secretly working against his own family. All those fights he had with Richard about business, all those bad investments he made. It was all a cover. He wasn't failing. He was gathering proof. He was building a case against his own brother to stop him from hurting innocent people. He was a hero. And I had never known. He had carried this heavy secret all by himself. And now I understood that he wasn't just hiding a secret. He was hiding from a very real danger. I was sitting there trying to understand this new truth about my husband when I heard a buzz. It was coming from my purse. It was the burner phone. I had forgotten I had put it in there. My hand trembled as I pulled it out. The screen was lit up. It was a text message. It was from the same number. It was from Janus. My heart hammered against my ribs. I was so scared to read it. What if it was a threat? What if they knew I had the phone? I took a deep breath and opened the message. There were only 5 words. But those 5 words made my blood run cold. They confirmed that my worst fears were true. The message on the screen said, "They know you have the key." My whole body went cold. They knew. Richard knew. He knew I had the one thing that could lead to his secrets. The message wasn't finished. A second one came through right after. "Trust the lawyer. Tell no one else." I looked out my living room window, down to the dark street below. And I saw it. The black car, Richard's car. It was parked across the street, half hidden in the shadows. He was watching me. He was watching my house. He was watching my son. The secret wasn't mine anymore. It was out, and I was in terrible danger. I didn't sleep that night. Every time the house made a noise, I jumped. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like someone was breaking in. The key, which I had put in my pocket, felt like it was burning a hole through the fabric. It was a key to the truth, but it was also a target on my back, and on my son's back. What was I supposed to do? I had the proof that Richard was a criminal, but he was a rich, powerful man. I was a widow with nothing. If I went to the police, would they even believe me? Or would Richard find a way to silence me, just like he might have silenced Mark? I was so scared and so alone. The sun came up, but it didn't make me feel any safer. I knew I had to do something. The text message from Janus said to trust the lawyer. I picked up my phone and dialed Mr. Thompson's number. My heart was pounding. When he answered, I didn't say hello. I remembered the code phrase from the burner phone. I took a breath and said, "Does the river run clear?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I thought maybe I had made a terrible mistake. But then Mr. Thompson's voice came back, low and serious. "Only when the dam is broken," he said. "My office, 1 hour. Come alone." He knew the code. He was part of this. Mr. Thompson's office looked the same, but it felt different. It didn't feel like a sad, lonely place anymore. It felt like a safe house. He didn't ask me to sit in the big chairs in the main room. He took me to a small back room and locked the door behind us. He looked at me with serious eyes. "Sarah," he said, "I am so sorry I couldn't tell you everything before. Mark made me promise." Then he told me the truth. He wasn't just Mark's lawyer. They had been best friends in college. They had stayed close all these years. He knew all about Mark's secret investigation. And he knew how dangerous it was. "Mark came to me about a year ago," Mr. Thompson said, his voice full of sadness. He was terrified. He had just found out how deep his family's crimes went. Together, Mark and Mr. Thompson had made the plan. The fake will that left me with nothing. The secret key. The hidden workshop. It was all a show. It was all designed to make Richard and the family think I was no threat. "He did it to keep you safe, Sarah," he told me. "He loved you and Leo more than anything. He knew if they thought you were poor and weak, they would leave you alone." It was all so much to take in. My husband hadn't betrayed me. He had been protecting me in the only way he knew how. "Mark found all the scientific proof," Mr. Thompson went on. "The soil tests, the chemical reports. He had enough to show that the company was breaking the law, but he was missing one thing." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. He was missing the ledger. I looked at him confused. "What ledger?" I asked. "The book," he said. "The book where his father wrote down all the bribes, all the illegal deals, all the payoffs to politicians. It's the one thing that proves they knew what they were doing for years." He told me Mark looked everywhere for it, but he could never find it. He believed it was hidden somewhere in his mother's house, the old family estate. A place I could never go. It was like the world was listening. Just as he said that, my phone started to ring. I looked at the screen. My blood ran cold. It was Clara, my sister-in-law, Richard's sister. I hadn't spoken to her since the day of the will reading. My hand was shaking as I answered. Her voice was fake sweet, like cheap candy. "Sarah, darling," she said. "Mother insists. You and Leo simply must come to the annual family memorial dinner this weekend. To honour Mark." A dinner. At her mother's house, the family estate. It was a trap. They were trying to get me on their home turf. But as I looked at Mr. Thompson, I realised something. A trap could also be an opportunity. Before I could answer Clara, Mr. Thompson put a hand on my arm. He shook his head, telling me to wait. "There's one more thing you need to know," he said, his face grim. Mark wasn't just collecting this proof for himself. He had a secret contact, a journalist. My eyes went wide. A journalist? "Yes," he said. He was going to give her everything. He was going to be an informant. He was going to expose his own family to the world. Mr. Thompson looked me straight in the eyes. "We think that's why he's gone, Sarah. We think they found out what he was planning to do and they stopped him." The room felt suddenly cold. My husband wasn't just an investigator. He was a whistleblower, and he had been silenced. I took a deep breath. My fear was a cold, hard knot in my stomach. But my sadness was turning into something else. It was turning into anger, a hot, burning anger. They had taken my husband. They had threatened my son. They were not going to get away with it. I put the phone back to my ear. "Clara," I said, my voice surprisingly calm and steady. "We would love to come. Thank you for inviting us." I hung up the phone. I looked at Mr. Thompson. He looked worried, but he nodded slowly. I knew what I had to do. I was going to walk into the home of the people who had destroyed my life. I had to find that ledger. It was the only way to get justice for Mark. When Leo and I arrived at the estate, the big house felt dark and cold, even with all the lights on. Mark's mother, Eleanor, greeted us at the door. She was a tall woman with hard eyes. She gave me a hug, but her arms felt like steel bars. It wasn't a hug. It was a warning. She held on a little too long, her fingers digging into my arm. "We are so glad you could be reasonable, Sarah," she whispered in my ear, her voice like ice. "It is always best for everyone when you know your place." She was telling me I was weak. She was telling me I was nothing. I just smiled, a small, sad smile. Let them think that, I thought. Let them underestimate me. That was my only advantage. The dinner was awful. The air was thick with things no one was saying. Richard stared at me the whole time. I tried to act normal for Leo's sake. After we ate, Leo, who was getting bored, started to wander around the huge dark house. I let him go, telling him not to touch anything. A few minutes later, he came running back to the living room, his eyes wide with excitement. He was holding a small wooden box. It had a bird carved on the top. "Mum, look," he whispered loudly. "It has the same bird on it as the one on Grandpa's old desk in the pictures." My head snapped up. I looked across the room at Richard. He was staring at the box in Leo's hand, and all the colour had drained from his face. The carved bird. I knew what he was talking about. Mark had shown me pictures of his father. The man had been proud of his family symbol, a hawk. I made an excuse about needing to use the restroom and followed the hallway Leo had come from. My heart was beating fast. At the end of the hall was a dark wooden door. It was his father's study. Mark told me his mother had kept it locked ever since the old man passed away. As I got closer, I saw the keyhole on the door. It wasn't a modern lock. It was an old, ornate one. It looked fancy and familiar. My hand went to my pocket, to the cold, heavy key Mr. Thompson had given me. It couldn't be. Could it? My hand was shaking so badly I could barely get the key out of my pocket. This was crazy. The key was for the workshop, the storage unit. It couldn't be for this too. I took a deep breath to steady myself. I looked down the long, empty hallway. No one was there. I slid the key into the old lock. I expected it to stop, to not fit, but it slid all the way in. I turned my wrist slowly. For a second, nothing happened. Then I heard a loud, satisfying click. The lock had opened. The key wasn't for the workshop. That was just the first step, the first clue. The key was for this. It was for the heart of the family's secrets. I slipped inside the study and closed the door softly behind me. The room was like a time capsule. It smelled of old books and leather. I knew I didn't have much time. Someone would notice I was gone. I had to find the ledger, and I had to find it now. My eyes darted around the room. There were tall bookshelves, a huge wooden desk, glass cases filled with old awards. Where would a man hide his most important secret? I ran my hands along the books, looking for a fake one. I pulled open the desk drawers, searching for a hidden compartment. Nothing. I could hear the muffled sounds of conversation from the living room. They would be looking for me soon. My panic started to rise. My eyes scanned the bookshelves one last time. I saw a thick, fancy-looking book. It was an old copy of Moby Dick. Mark had told me it was his father's favourite story. It was just a book, but something made me reach for it. As I pulled it from the shelf, it felt wrong. It was too light. My heart started to pound. I opened the cover. The inside was not filled with words. The pages had been cut out, forming a secret, hidden box. And there, resting inside the hollowed-out book, was a small, simple notebook with a black cover. The ledger. I had found it. I quickly flipped through the pages. It was all there. Names, dates, and amounts of money that made my head spin. This was it. This was the proof that could bring them all down. This was justice for Mark. I slipped the ledger into my big purse, my hands trembling with victory, but just as I was about to turn and leave, I heard it. Footsteps, coming down the hall. They were getting closer, and then they stopped right outside the study door. I froze, my body turning to ice. I was trapped. There was nowhere to go, there was nowhere to hide. The doorknob began to turn, the door started to creak open. I was caught. It was over. But in that same second, a new sound screamed through the house. It was the fire alarm, a loud, piercing shriek. Through the opening door, I saw my son, Leo. He was standing in the hallway, a can of my hairspray in his hand, pointing it at the smoke detector on the ceiling. He looked right at me, his expression not of a scared little boy, but of a brave little soldier. He had seen me go into the study. He had heard the footsteps coming. And he had saved me. Richard, who had been opening the door, was now distracted, yelling about the alarm. He knew I had it. He had followed me. And my son had just given me my only chance to escape. In the panic and confusion as everyone was running around wondering what was happening, I grabbed Leo's hand. We slipped out the back door of the kitchen. I didn't stop running until we reached my car. I buckled Leo in, my hands shaking so much I could barely do it. I looked back at the big, dark house. I could see their shapes in the windows. They knew. As I drove away, I clutched the purse with the ledger in it. This wasn't just a secret I had found. It was a weapon I had stolen. This was no longer just me trying to find the truth. This was now a war. And I had just fired the first shot. I had a feeling they were going to fire back. Hard. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. I had barely slept. I kept thinking I heard noises outside. I went to the front door to get the newspaper, but when I opened the door, I didn't see the paper. On my front porch, lying right in the middle of the mat, was a dead bird. My heart stopped. My blood ran cold. There was no note. There didn't need to be one. It was a message, a threat. It was from Richard and his mother. They were telling me they knew I had the ledger. They were telling me to be afraid. And they were telling me what they would do to people who crossed them. They were done playing games. And I knew for the first time that I was truly scared for my life. I grabbed the bird with a plastic bag, my hands shaking, and threw it in the trash. I would not let them terrorize me. I took Leo to a neighbor's house, telling him we had a small pest problem. Then I drove straight to Mr. Thompson's office. I put the ledger on his desk. He introduced me to a woman who was sitting there waiting for me. Her name was Jessica, and she was the journalist Mark had been talking to. Jessica had sharp, intelligent eyes. She looked at the ledger, and then at me. "This is amazing," she said. "This is the proof we needed." But then her face grew serious. But a book isn't enough to put them in jail. We need someone to talk. We need a confession. We sat there for an hour making a plan. Richard was too hard. Eleanor was too powerful. They would never talk. But there was someone else. Clara, I said, thinking out loud. Mark's sister. Mr. Thompson and Jessica looked at me. She's always been the weak one, I explained. She's terrified of her mother and her brother. She's emotional. She lives in their shadow. Jessica nodded slowly, a small smile on her face. The weakest link in the chain, she said. She's the one we need to break. We knew what we had to do. We had to get to Clara. We had to turn her against her own family. It felt cruel, but it was the only way. I found out where Clara liked to have coffee. The next day, I went there and waited. I pretended to be surprised when I saw her. I walked over to her table and asked if I could join her. She looked nervous, but she said yes. I didn't say anything about the ledger or the family business. I was very careful. I just talked about Mark. I told her stories about when we were young. I reminded her what a good man he was, how kind his heart was. I told her how he never really fit in with the family's win-at-all-costs way of thinking. I could see the sadness in her eyes. I could see her remembering the brother she loved, not the business partner she feared. As I was getting ready to leave, I looked her straight in the eye. I made my voice soft and sad. Clara, I said, did you know they were faking the environmental reports for the new playground they are building? Her eyes went wide. She didn't know. Did you know that playground is being built on poisoned soil? I didn't wait for her answer. I just watched the colour drain from her face. I saw the horror dawn in her eyes. She had children of her own. I had planted a seed of doubt in her mind. A seed of fear not for herself, but for other innocent children. I stood up and walked away, leaving her there to think about the monster her family had become. It worked. That night my phone rang. The number was blocked. I answered and it was Clara. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her. You don't know, she sobbed into the phone. You don't know what they are, what she is. She was talking about her mother, Eleanor. She is a monster. I tried to ask her questions to get her to tell me more, but she was too scared. She kept saying, they'll find out I called. They'll know. Then I heard a noise in the background on her end and she gasped. The line went dead. She had hung up. But I knew I had done it. I had broken through. The chain was starting to crack. We had her. Jessica, the journalist, said now was the time to put more pressure on the family. We couldn't let them feel safe. So we came up with a plan. Jessica wrote a small story for a news blog. It didn't have any names in it. It just said that a big local construction company was being looked at for accounting problems. It was just a little bait. It was enough to scare them, to make them think someone on the inside was talking, to make them paranoid. We were hoping it would make them make a mistake. We were hoping it would push them into doing something stupid. And it worked even better than we had ever dreamed. Richard panicked, just like we knew he would. He made a phone call. And because Jessica had a friend in the right place, we were able to trace it. He didn't call his lawyer. He didn't call his mother. He called a city councilman, a powerful politician who was supposed to be a man of the people. Jessica's eyes lit up when she saw the name. Oh, this is big, she said. This is bigger than we thought. It wasn't just about a greedy family poisoning the land. It was about a corrupt politician taking bribes to look the other way. This wasn't just a local crime anymore. It was a citywide conspiracy. The whole house of cards was connected. My phone rang again. It was Clara. She sounded even more scared than before. Meet me, she whispered. I have to give you something, please. She told me a place and a time. She said she had something that Mark had given her just a few weeks before he passed away. He had told her to keep it safe and to give it to me if anything ever happened to him. I agreed to meet her. but I felt a cold dread in my heart. Why was she doing this now? Was it another trap? Or was she really so scared of her family that she was willing to betray them to save herself? I didn't know. But I knew I had to go. I met Clara at a small, quiet park. She was looking around, terrified, like a scared rabbit. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. She pushed a small thing into my hand. It was a USB drive, a little memory stick for a computer. "Mark made a recording," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "He recorded a phone call," she sobbed. "Between him and Richard and the councilman. They were angry he had found out about their deal." She looked me in the eyes, her own eyes full of shame. He knew they were going to come after him. He knew they were planning to silence him. It wasn't just proof of their crimes. It was proof of their motive. I rushed back to Mr. Thompson's office. Jessica was there. We plugged the USB drive into her laptop. There was one audio file on it. We clicked play. And my husband's voice filled the room. It was so clear, it felt like he was right there with us. My heart ached to hear him again. His voice was so calm, so steady, as he told Richard he knew everything. Then we heard Richard's voice. It was cold and full of hate. "You should have stayed out of it, little brother," Richard said. "Some things are better left buried." It wasn't a direct threat, but it was close. It was a confession, caught on tape. It was the final nail in their coffin. We finally had them. We had it all, the ledger with the bribes, the recording of the threat, the connection to a corrupt politician. We had the whole story, and we knew the perfect place to tell it. The family's biggest event of the year was in 2 days, the annual charity gala. It was a huge party where they pretended to be good people, giving money to the poor. Hundreds of important people would be there. The mayor, the press, the TV news. They would all be in one room. Jessica smiled, a dangerous glint in her eye. "It's time to break the dam," she said. It was time to show the whole city who the monsters really were. I had never felt so scared in my entire life. I walked into the fancy ballroom on Mr. Thompson's arm. I was just a widow in a simple black dress, but I felt like a soldier walking into battle. The room was filled with rich people in fancy clothes. Eleanor and Richard were near the stage, greeting everyone. When they saw me, their smiles froze on their faces. They watched me as I moved through the crowd. Their eyes were full of hate. They knew I was there to do something, but they couldn't stop me. Not here, not in front of all these important people. The trap was set. All I had to do was wait for the right moment. After an hour of fake smiles and boring speeches, the moment came. Eleanor, Mark's mother, walked to the stage. She was the host of the event. At the end of her speech, she looked right at me. "And now," she said, her voice dripping with fake sadness, "I'd like to invite my dear daughter-in-law Sarah to the stage to say a few words in memory of my beloved son Mark." This was it, the moment we had planned for. I could see the panic in Richard's eyes. He knew. I stood up and walked toward the stage, my legs feeling like jelly. The whole room was silent, watching me. They were expecting a sad widow's tears. They were about to get something very different. I stood at the podium and looked out at the hundreds of faces staring back at me. I took a deep breath. "My husband, Mark, was a good man," I began, my voice clear and strong. "He was a man who believed in the truth." I paused. "And he died for it." Then, I pulled out the small audio player Jessica had given me and held it up to the microphone. Mark's voice filled the huge ballroom, then Richard's voice, making his cold threat. At the same time, the huge screen behind the stage, which was supposed to be showing pictures of the charity, lit up. On it were pages from the ledger showing the bribes, the dates, the names. The name of the city councilman was circled in red. The silence in the room was broken by gasps of shock. It was chaos. People were shouting. Reporters were running toward the stage with their cameras. I looked at Eleanor and Richard. Their faces were white with shock and horror. They were trapped. Just then, Police officers who had been waiting outside entered the ballroom. They walked straight to the stage and put Richard and Eleanor in handcuffs. The flashing lights of the cameras were everywhere, capturing the moment of their downfall for the whole world to see. I stood there in the middle of the storm, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt peace. Mark had gotten his justice. My son was safe. It was finally over. Months passed. The trials were on the news every night. The family's empire came crashing down. All their money was taken to clean up the poisoned land they had created. Leo and I moved to a new, smaller house. We were safe. We were happy. Mark had left a secret trust fund with Mr. Thompson with clean money that would take care of us forever. One day, for the first time in over a year, my house was quiet. Mr. Thompson brought over the last box of Mark's things from the old house. Inside, under some old photos, I found a small leather notebook. I opened it. It was filled with Mark's handwriting, but it was in some kind of code. The pages were filled with maps, not of our town, but of the jungles in South America. It seemed my husband had one more secret, a secret that had nothing to do with his family, and one he never got the chance to tell me. Friend, thank you for staying with me to the very end of this long journey. If you believe that strength isn't about how you fall but how you get back up, then please tap subscribe and join our community. You won't want to miss the stories we share next. I've picked out another story just for you, and you should see it on the screen now. I hope to see you there.